Sherry, I think we can go ahead and start whenever you're ready.
Okay. Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for showing up on a weird September evening. I can't this weather. Anyway, I love these temperatures. I'm very happy you could make it tonight because you're in for a treat, especially if you love trees. And before I introduce our speaker though, I do want to tell you about our November 3rd gardening talk, which is called Botanically Crafting the Concrete Jungle. And our speaker then will be Ashton Holiday Goulart, who is the current Virginia Beach Horticultural Extension Agent. We're very happy to have her. She's a live wire for sure. My name is Sherry Kern, and I'm a Virginia Beach Master Gardener and Tree Steward. And I'm also the coordinator of gardening talks and workshops. So, and later on in October, we're going to be putting the 2026 lineup of speakers and topics on the website. And we're real excited about the lineup then. So I hope you stay with us. Anyway, I would love to introduce Brent James now. After a 27 year career as a Navy fighter pilot, Brent was a founder of an international cargo airline, Gemini Air Cargo, and subsequently of People Express Airlines as the VP of operations with both. He lives on the Lynn Haven and has been active in environmental work for many years. His property has been designated as a backyard wildlife habitat and has a residential oyster reef along the shoreline. His undergrad was at the U.S. Naval Academy and grad school was at Harvard University. He is a certified Virginia master naturalist and is the founder of the Virginia Beach Notable Tree Program. May I, Brent, share your, it looks like your email address with Lynn Haven River now?
Certainly.
I'll put it in the chat so you can look there to get his email address. And I also want to thank you, Mary Ella, for overseeing the Zoom tonight. We really appreciate your efforts too.
Well, we'll see how that goes.
You're doing a fine job, fine job. One thing I've learned about master gardeners, we don't throw things at people.
That's right. Thank goodness.
You know, we appreciate everything anybody does for us. We really appreciate it. So, Brent, let's take it away.
Okay. Well, if you could put the first slide up, Mary Ellen.
I will do that. Okay.
Boom. Okay. So as you were told, I am a Virginia Master Naturalist. The reason that I include that as a part of this discussion is because this program grew out of my Master Naturalist training. About halfway through the course, Karen Safranek, who is the head trainer for the Master Naturalists in the Tidewater area, dropped a small bomb on us that said, oh, by the way, be thinking about your final exam projects. And we all sort of looked at each other and thought, what? There's a final exam project? I had no idea what I wanted to do. I'm not that creative in terms of coming up with fresh ideas. So I was thinking about it. And just coincidentally that night, we had a lecture from a Virginia Department of Forestry forester, Molly O'Litty, about the Virginia Big Tree Program. And it was fascinating. I was just enraptured by it. And so I started kind of connecting the dots on that and came up with this program of trying to identify and well, sort of first find, then identify, and then memorialize the old growth trees in Virginia Beach. Go to the next slide, please. You may have seen in your travelings around, in either in your role as a master gardener or just in driving around, you may have seen these little green signs that I have put up on the trees. And we'll talk a little bit more about the signs later, but this is how I denote the tier 1 notable trees so that the public then can look at them and say, aha, that tree has some special characteristics or is of a size that, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, but is of a size that identifies it as a notable tree. Next slide, please. So as I started doing background research for this program, I went on some historical maps and looked at the old growth forests in the United States, in the continental United States, the lower 48. And as you can see, from the time shortly after John Smith came ashore with the first permanent colonists in Jamestown, pretty much everything east of the Mississippi River was old growth forest, and a very healthy swath down the Rocky Mountains and down the coast of the Pacific. Fast forward 130 years to just before the Civil War, and you can start to see the impact that colonization and settlement and development and industrialization was having on the old growth forest. The people were consuming the wood. When John Smith came ashore, he was originally sent by the London Company to find gold because the Spaniards were having great success finding gold down in Central America. And so the London Company said, okay, go to North America and see what you can find. Well, didn't find any gold, but he wrote back and said, I found two things of interest, of economic interest, or interest. The first being unlimited forest resources. And at that time, England was starting to feel the pinch from having the largest navy in the world and so forth, of building all the ships and the houses and using it for fuel. And their population was growing, so their old growth forests were becoming decimated. So John Smith says, well, there is an unlimited supply of timber in the United States. So they were very happy about that. And the other thing he mentioned was, and oh, by the way, there is this weed that the local Indians tend to dry out and smoke called tabac. And I don't know if it'd be of any interest, but I'll send some back and see if you all find it interesting. And of course, that's tobacco, and that turned into a multi-billion-dollar worldwide industry. So John Smith was responsible for both the the aggressive approach to harvesting the forests, as well as the cultivation of tobacco. And you can see there by 1850, just before the Civil War, made an impact. Not much on the West Coast. It looks pretty similar to what they'd had much earlier because there was very little settlement out there. But then you fast forward to the period right after World War I, and now you can see the eastern half of the United States, old growth forests had just about disappeared. And then bump it up to the 90s, and there's nothing. I mean, no forest areas on the East Coast that are old growth. And that has continued to today. That's 35 years ago now, but that has continued. But the big thing there between, the 20s and the 90s, look at the West Coast, how that also, the whole state of Washington pretty much cleared out of old growth forests. Oregon, Northern California still have some over into Montana, but in large measure, the old growth forests as they stood when John Smith first came ashore no longer exist in the continental United States. So that showed me, okay, these remnants of the old growth forest, these lone survivors that we have around here, really need to be highlighted, and people need to see them and understand how magical they are to have survived the onslaught. All of Virginia Beach has been logged. It was clear-cut logging, and because it was so close to the port of Norfolk, it was just a great resource for the English to start shipping lumber out of the port of Norfolk. So this area, the trees that we do have in Virginia Beach, and my program is limited to Virginia Beach, they're just, incidental survivors of the old growth forests. Okay, next slide, please. So if you if you Google Virginia Beach notable trees, you'll come up with a website. It's actually appended on to the Lynnhaven River Now website, where I am the oyster restoration coordinator as well as the notable tree program manager. But you'll find a map that looks something like this there. This was an old Google map. It highlighted all the trees. You click on the icons and it gives you a little box that comes up, and it tells you how old it is, the address, the type of tree, so on and so forth. That map was lost when Lynnhaven River Now transitioned from Google to Microsoft, and I've had 3 high school interns, 4 college interns, and 2 college professors try to resurrect the map on Microsoft. Cannot do it. I mean, they managed to get a map, but it was terrible. So I went back to Google, and with 1 college intern and 1 fellow colleague there from Lynnhaven River Now, we have resurrected the map. So there is an interactive map now. This was a big thing for a lot of people. One mother and son put a lifetime bucket list to go and visit every single tree on the notable tree list, and there's over 200 now that are tier 1. And that I thought was rather remarkable. I was giving a talk, and they came up afterward and showed me their checklist, and it was incredible that they had visited every single tree that was yet there. So there are some new ones now. We're still populating the map a little bit. There will be continuing tree changes to it. If you notice on that map, there's a little black dot down at the bottom, or sort of the middle bottom. That's a sad situation, not a good situation. So let's go to the next slide and talk about that. So the program started with a bang, but there's been some sadness in it, and I get very close to these trees and view them kind of as friends. I was on my way down Princess Anne Road, almost all the way to the North Carolina line, one of the more southerly trees in the program, to go look and measure a white oak that was on a lady's farm down there. And I drove by this tree going down Princess Anne Road and said, "Oh, that's a beautiful tree. I'll measure that on the way back." So I went down to this lady's farm. She was a widow. She had not had a visitor in almost 3 months, she told me. And she had collected everything she wanted to say in her mind to anyone, and then unloaded it on me. So I was there for over 3 hours. And she was a lovely lady, and I just let her talk and talk and talk. And I learned about her daughter-in-law's boyfriend and her, this and that. And I knew all about the family history. But by the time it was over, 4 hours later, after I had passed by this tree, I went back to it with the intention of measuring it. And this is what I found. The tree company had been there. They had cut it down. And it was a beautiful, healthy northern red oak right on Princess Anne Road on one of the farms there, about 245 years old. I was able to do a ring count on it to get a very accurate measurement. And I went up, I looked at it, and I went and talked to the tree guys, and I said, "Why on earth did you take this tree down?" And they said, "Well, the lady who owns the property hired us to do it." So I went up and knocked on the door, and this little old lady came to the door, and I said, "Ma'am, can I ask you why you had that tree removed?" And she said that her son thought it put too much shade on the driveway. Now, this is Pungo. There's not very many trees there, and there's very little shade. And my head was about to explode. And I said, "Ma'am, that tree was perfectly healthy." I think in hindsight, I think probably he didn't like raking up the leaves in the fall. But bottom line was, he talked his mother into cutting it down, and she said, "Well," and she was all upset and said, "Well, I'll plant another one." And then I explained to her how old this tree was And I said, ma'am, your great, 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 great grandchildren might see another tree like this if everything's perfect, no diseases, it's not taken by a hurricane or a tornado or a thunderstorm or an ice storm or disease or pests. 7 generations to get to this tree. So the point of that long dissertation there is that once these trees are gone, they're gone. And we're in our lifetimes, we're not going to see. I mean, this tree, and I went by there the other day, she didn't even bother to plant another one. I made her cry. I guess that was the successful part of my endeavor, making old ladies cry. But I felt bad about that. But the tree itself was gone, and it was, by the time I even finished talking to her, was almost pretty much cut up and hauled away. So this is what can happen, and unfortunately does happen in too many cases. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, here's another situation. I was up at the Virginia Institute of Marine Sciences up in Gloucester Point for a conference on oysters, and I was driving home, and I decided instead of going the freeway, I would go down Ocean View Boulevard and that way back to Virginia Beach. And as I was driving past Bay Oaks Park in Norfolk, I noticed about a dozen big trucks and backhoes and bulldozers, all this giant construction equipment in the park. And so and they were putting up the orange fence around all the trees there, about a third of the park. And so I stopped and I said, "What's going on?" And they said, "Well, the Norfolk Housing and Redevelopment Office is having us cut all these trees down. They're going to build houses." And I said, "Are you kidding me? This is the oldest part of this park. These trees, some of these trees are over 200 years old, and you're just going to take them down to build houses?" I said, "Hey, we got a contract." So I called the Virginian Pilot. They got a photographer out there, and we talked about it, and we took a bunch of pictures. This tree here, there were over 50 live oaks and loblolly pines that were cut down, all of which were over 100 years old. This tree here was the oldest. This was 200 years old. And as it was laying here, as I was looking at it on its side, 2 white herons came in from the water and were circling around, and one of them was just squalling and squawking, and it turns out there was a white heron nest in the top of the tree, and I presume I didn't see any chicks. I think she probably lost her eggs, but it was just absolutely tear-jerking to hear this poor white heron, and she landed on the branches, but the nest was long gone at that point. So some of these stories are very sad and very touching, and this motivated me to really get on with this program and do what I could to save these trees. Yes, ma'am. Next slide, please. So sometimes you have forces of nature and natural, elements that occur that cause the loss of trees is sad, but it's nowhere near as sad as when man just callously goes in and cuts them down. This was the largest tree on NES Oceana. It was right in front of the Bachelor Enlisted Quarters, you can see in the background, and had a ice storm hit it in 2019. You can see my little green sign on it, my notable tree sign. But when the ice storm hit, it was a split trunk tree, and you can see how the one trunk broke off. I went to the base arborist, who I knew and I'd worked with, and we talked about it and looked it over, and I had to agree with her that it was too unbalanced and too likely that the other half would come down precipitously in a storm or something, and so they had to take it down. It was 250 years old, and it was a natural death, but it was still sad to see it happen. Next slide, please. So the beginning of the program, I got off to a rather less than impressive start, shall we say. I called the 2 best tree hunters in Virginia, Gary Williamson and Byron Carmion, who live out in Suffolk. They individually or together as a team are responsible for over 40% of the Virginia big tree champion trees in Virginia. They've gone out and found them. They do this almost semi-professionally. They're out every single day looking for trees. But I called them up and I said, hey, I've got a list now of, after I decided to do this program, I just driving around, I found 21 trees that I thought were pretty good. And would they come down and take a look at them with me on a Saturday? So they drove down and we hopped in my car and started driving. Went to the first tree, which was in Kings Grant, and they looked at it and said, "Oh, that's a beautiful tree." And I thought I was very proud, and I thought, "Oh, this is great." And they said, "But it's not a state champion type tree," and they didn't even unbuckle their seat belts. And so we went on to the second tree. They made exactly the same comment. Beautiful tree, very nice, not going to be a state champion. And so all the way around my 21 trees, we went by 20 of them, and I hadn't even gotten them to unbuckle their seat belts yet. So I was crushed. Got this tree here was the 21st tree. This is at Church Point Manor, right next to the manor house there. It's a willow oak. It's about 250 years old. And at least at that one, they said, "Oh, let's take a look at it." And they actually got out of the car and measured it. It didn't make the state champion list. Willow oaks grow to be enormous, but they measured it, and so at least I felt a bit vindicated there. But you know, went home and thought, "Gee, Willikers, I've struck out completely. My 21 trees, they just deflated my balloon." So, but then I started thinking that night, these are beautiful trees, and these are old growth trees, and they deserve some recognition and as much protection as I can afford them. So that's when all this kind of started coming together. I was talking about this program at a staff meeting at Lynn Haven River Now, just mentioned in passing that I was starting up this program for notable trees, and they got real excited and real interested. And Mary Reed Barrow, who used to write an environmental column for the Beacon, um, she was there that day, and she got excited, and she said, "I'd love to see one of these trees." And I said, "Well, the best one that so far I've found is the one at Church Point Manor." And so we made an appointment to go over there. She brought a photographer with her from the newspaper. And this is my youngest daughter, Peyton, swinging on the swing. Now, in my youth, my mother had taken us there to see the old manor house, which was a Confederate Civil War hospital and reputed to be haunted. But I remember this tree, and I remember swinging on that swing, that same swing. Probably has had the rope replaced in the interim, but so we decided to put Peyton on the swing and take the picture of the tree. So in the first month that I had the program up and running, I had 2 tree nominations. 2. Uh, Mary Reed Barrow wrote her article. It came out on a Friday, and by the end of that weekend, I had 76 tree nominations. So that tells you something about the power of the press. But it was a wonderful start. I mean, it was almost overwhelming. And then I started going around measuring and so forth. The way you measure a tree for the big tree program in the state and in the country is you measure it at what's called breast height circumference, is 48 inches off the ground. You measure the circumference, then you measure the height, and then you measure the crown span. And that combination with a little formula comes up with a number of points, and those points are what determines where the tree stands in terms of state championship or national championship. Now, this tree, when I went back to measure it, I noticed around the base of it, there were all these little bones, little skulls and rib cages and just little ones. And I thought, oh man, is this a voodoo tree or what? And I was really kind of a little, I won't say freaked out, but I was wondering what the heck was going on. And I talked to the maintenance guy when Church Point Manor was a bed and breakfast. He came out and said, "Oh yeah, there's a family of vultures that lives in the tree." And we looked up, and sure enough, there's 2 vultures there standing there with their wings spread, just looking down at us. So when the mother and father vultures would bring the little carrion back for their babies, they would eat the meat and then spit the bones out, and that's what was piled up around the base of the tree. So it wasn't a voodoo tree or anything. Okay, if we could go to the next slide. Okay, the important purposes. Why are old growth trees important? Well, obviously, there's many reasons: water uptake, stormwater control. a large old growth tree. This is a sycamore at the Francis Land House on Virginia Beach Boulevard. A tree this size can take up between 400 and 500 gallons a day. So in the old days, when the whole of Virginia Beach was populated with this size tree, there was no erosion into the Lynnhaven. The depth of the Lynnhaven 100 years ago averaged 14 feet. Lynnhaven Bay and the eastern western branch, 14 feet. Today it's 8 feet, and that 6 feet is all siltation. It's all erosion and runoff from the streets, from the construction along the shoreline before the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act put some limits on all that. So, I mean, almost half of the depth of the bay is gone due to erosion. The trees would have prevented that historically, but since there's very few of them left, creates a problem. Obviously, we know about the photosynthesis process and the carbon cycle and so forth. CO2 absorption, and leaves take in the carbon dioxide, they spit out oxygen, which supports human life and all other life on the planet. Shade and cooling effects from these giant crowns of these trees is tremendous, and that certainly makes it a more pleasant place to live. Soil stability, I mentioned, it prevents not only by the water uptake and preventing streams from forming, but it also stabilizes just with the root balls. It stabilizes the soil and it holds the soil. And the one at that particular point in my life that was probably the most important was you see my daughter on the left there. Well, that's her then boyfriend on the right. And I said, look, you guys can hug each other all you want as long as one of my notable trees is right in the middle between you. So it worked as an impediment to teenage biology in the best way. And you can see they're trying, but that worked for me as a dad. So that was another important purpose that some people might not be aware of. Next slide, please. This tree, ironically named Minnie, is the second oldest tree in Virginia Beach that I have found yet. It is the largest live oak in Virginia Beach. This is a live oak. It was on the old Fairfield Plantation, which is now Fairfield Shopping Center down in Kempsville. The Thomas Walk family came to Virginia from Bermuda, actually, and by England by way of Bermuda, and bought a bunch of property. They were pretty wealthy, and they established this plantation back in the late 1600s. Well, this tree was already 100 years old at that time. So it's about, right now, it's about between 450 and 475 years old. The lady who took care of this tree most recently, her name was Charlene Hood. She has since passed away, unfortunately, but she and her husband were out house hunting, and they walked in the front of this house. It was a brand new house at that time, and they looked at it and said, "No, this won't do. We don't want this. It's not, it's not what we're looking for." Thanked the agent and walked out. She happened to notice this large tree. The top of the canopy was overhanging the house. She said, "Let me walk around the back and look at that." And she walked around the garage and took a look at it, and after one look said, "We're buying this house." So they bought the house for the tree, and for 40 years she protected it and just was an absolutely lovely lady. The new people are also very protective of it. It's a beautiful tree, and it was on the state champion list. It's been bumped off now by another tree in Norfolk that was recently found between two tiny houses that's actually bigger than this. So you can imagine how big that is. But this is a very old and beautiful old growth live oak. Next slide, please. Sometimes these trees are in very challenging locations. This is a northern red oak in Kings Grant. It's been heavily pruned, large branches removed, so it looks almost like a palm tree. It just goes the trunk just goes way, way up, and then at the very top, you have the canopy. The Thrasher family lives here. They were afraid that the branches overhanging the house could become hazardous to the house. So they kept, as they would develop, they had them removed. But what you can't really see too well around the base of it, it's in a little garden area that is enclosed by concrete. And so it's not a ideal setting for a tree, but the tree is done very, very well and 260 years old and still going strong. Next slide. So an even more challenging location is this one, another northern red oak in London Bridge, right on the corner, well, a little bit down from Potters Road and London Bridge Road. The entire front yard is a parking area, and you can see the car parked behind there is the people who live there. When I first found this tree, it was stacked about 10 feet tall with cinder blocks and bricks. They used it, the family does construction, and they used it as a construction storage site, and they just piled stuff up around it. You know, the cars driving and the trucks driving around the base of it were, you know, compressing the root system very badly. But the tree persisted, and it's got a large enough root structure that it goes out beyond the front yard in every direction. So even the compression wasn't enough to kill the tree. It's doing quite well. Been pruned a little bit, but not too badly. And the little old lady, the grandmother who lives there with the family, when I explained the program to her, she said, "We will move those cinder blocks and bricks." And sure enough, within a week, they were all gone. Now you see my daughter with her arm extended. From her center line out to the tip of her fingers is exactly 2.5 feet. So I started using her as my model to show how big these trees are, because it's hard. Trees are hard to photograph. If you stand back far enough to get the whole crown and everything and the trunk, it looks like just a little toy tree. So you get up close to it like this, you can see the size of the trunk, but you don't get a sense of how big is that really. So I started using her and my little Chihuahua here as markers to show the size. And this one was about 280 years old when the picture was taken. Okay, next slide, please. One of the better areas or better locations around here are the old plantations, because a lot of them still exist, obviously in much smaller form, but the plantation houses and the surrounds there are in some cases the best places to look for these old trees. This northern, actually, I have northern red oak on the slide. It's actually 1/3 northern red oak, 2/3 southern red oak, and I'll explain that in a minute. But it's Green Hill by the Bay off of Great Neck Road, right back by the old plantation house. The plantation house is rather large. It's got 2 wings that were added on. The original house was built in the 1800s, and the 2 wings were added on in the mid-1900s. And I thought that was the original house, and this small house off the side of it was like a caretaker's house or something like that. Turns out that was the original farmhouse from a grant from the king in 1642, and it's been restored by the Page family. The outdoor kitchen is now restored, and so this tree is on that property. The tree is about 325 years old. Now I mentioned it's 1/3 northern red oak, 2/3 southern red oak. One of the bedeviling things about oak trees, the whole Quercus genus, is that they cross-pollinate. So you'll find the same tree will have different leaves on it, and you look at them, and I'll show you at the end one that confounded me, but we came to an agreement, me and the owner, of what it actually was. But this tree, yeah, the first time I looked at it, I said, "Oh, northern red oak, clearly." But then I went back and looked around the other side, and it's clearly a southern red oak on that side. So it's funny how they do that, and it's very difficult sometimes to identify them. Next slide, please. Storm survivors. Storm trees, storms do great damage to trees, especially if they are lone sentry trees and not in the midst of a forest. If they're standing out by themselves, as most of these old growth trees are now, they're not full of forest full of old growth trees anymore. So a lot of times when a hurricane or a strong thunderstorm or an ice storm or something comes up, they'll take some significant damage. And this tree is a good example of that. I was down at Munden Point Park looking for trees one day, nice spring day, and um, I saw 4 trucks from the Parks and Recreation Department in Virginia Beach down there, and they were all on their lunch break, and they decided to take their lunch break at Munden Point Park. And I went up to one to one truck, and all 4 of the men in it were sound asleep. And I went to another one, same thing, all taking a snooze after they'd had their lunch until they went back to work. And so the third one I went up to, I tapped on the window, and 3 of the 4 people in the truck jolted awake. Fourth one didn't even raise his head, the guy in the passenger seat, and he looked like he was still asleep. But I explained who I was, that I was looking for these large trees. They pointed one out to me in the park there, and I went and measured it, and it is, in fact, a Tier 1 notable tree, beautiful oak tree. But I said, if you're driving around and you happen to see any of these old trees, and the guy who I thought was asleep never lifted his head up, never opened his eyes, he just said, 863 Sandbridge Road. And I went, oh, that's pretty specific. So I drove down to Sandbridge Road, and sure enough, this is where this tree was. Now, you can see the root flare there on the bottom, which is what it's properly called. Most people colloquially call it the elephant's foot, but you can see this has a beautiful root flare there. I mean, it's just very classic and structured. And you can see from the size from my daughter's arm, it's about a 5-foot diameter on this tree. So it's a large old willow oak. Now, willow oaks grow enormous. There are some of the biggest oaks in terms of trunk size, but it had lost 2 65-foot limbs, one in Hurricane Isabel and one in Hurricane Matthew, that actually fell on Sandbridge Road and blocked the road. So it had taken, these large limbs had actually taken out the highway there. The limb scars were healing. It takes a long time for that scar tissue to grow back. It's actually stronger than the original wood in the tree. So a scar on a tree where a limb formerly was is actually a strong point on the tree. The McNabb family lived here on this property, and this tree was about 300 years old when the picture was taken about 5 years ago. Now, since then, another large limb fell off in a strong thunderstorm and crushed their neighbor's fence, which, their neighbor took it in good humor. He loves the tree. And I got there the day after, just coincidentally, and saw it, stopped, and I went over, and they were looking at it and figuring out what to do. But sometimes these old trees, and this one is kind of getting toward, you can see, it's kind of like an old dog who gets the white fur on his face. The tree's kind of doing the same thing there with the moss and the mold and the fungus on the elephant's foot. Okay, next slide. Now this tree is an interesting one. This is off of London Bridge Road, right by where the old, what was it called? The big warehouse. Can't think of the name, but right there at the intersection of International Parkway and London Bridge Road, just north of there on London Bridge Road, there's still some working farms. They're not big, but there's still have some. You'll go by and see a little cattle or some goats or sheep or something in the backyard. I noticed this one loblolly pine there, and I stopped in on a Saturday afternoon. I went and knocked on the front door of the house, and I could hear some movement inside the house. The screen door was closed, but the main door was open. And I was saying, hello, hello, and nobody came to the door. So I walked around the back, tapped on the back door, and this lady, elderly lady came. She said, I heard you in the front. I was stirring my gravy and I didn't want to stop. And I said, oh, okay, well, that's just fine. Stirring gravy is important. I explained who I was and that I'd like to measure the tree. And I was asking her about the tree. And she said, well, the neatest thing about that tree is it's been struck by lightning 5 times. And I thought, wow. And I thought, well, okay, maybe. Well, I went out there, and sure enough, there are 5 very distinctive lightning scars running down vertically down the bark, where you can see right where the bolt passed down through the phloem and the xylem, slightly under the bark, and it blows the bark off, and they form scars there. So it had been struck 5 times, still doing great, still standing strong. It's almost a state champion size loblolly pine, not quite, but pretty close. And for a loblolly, it's very old. 235 years is an old loblolly. So this one's a pretty tough one. I went back the next day to take a picture with Peyton, my daughter, doing her arm out thing, and the lady had forgotten who I was, and she has 2 German Shepherds that are about the size of a buffalo, I think. They were huge, and they were standing there inside the screen door, and she said, "Get out of my yard, or I'm going to sick my dogs on you." And we hustled out of there, so I didn't get any pictures of my daughter here, but she was an interesting lady. She also owns the 2 houses next to the farmhouse she's in, and in their yards are 2 other notable trees, one very large live oak and one very large willow oak. Next slide, please. The split trunk issue was something that I dealt with when I first started this program. Back then, the way you would measure, this is one tree. I dug down to make sure it wasn't 2 trees growing next to each other. They're connected. This is one tree that grew out as a split trunk. The way it used to be measured was you would measure all the way around both trunks, including the airspace in between, and that would be called the circumference of the tree. And I couldn't believe that. I said, that's crazy. I mean, you get some of these live oaks that come out of the ground, split trunk, but they're 45 degrees off. You'd have an enormous area between the trunks, and it's just air. It has nothing to do with the size of the tree or the trunk or anything. So I petitioned the state big tree program up at Virginia Tech. I said, I think this is wrong. And I got some support from some of these other tree folks around the state that I had met. But by all joining forces, we got it changed. So now the way you do it is you measure each individual trunk and then you average it out. Okay. All right. I'll get to the oldest tree here in a little bit. I see the question there. Okay, go back for that last one. If you could, there you go. This one also had a ring around it about 30 feet wide of poison ivy. And that's a very prolific vine in this area. And I find that oftentimes I have to wear knee boots to go get close enough to the trees to measure them. And even measuring them sometimes is very interesting because the poison ivy is growing up the trunks. So I wear gloves and, we manage, but sometimes that's a little bit of an impediment. This one was 330 years old. The right-hand trunk here, not the one my daughter's in front of, but the other one is now down. It fell in a storm. So it's a single trunk now. Okay, next slide. Okay, the sign challenges. This is the northern red oak on Oceana Boulevard, right by the end of the runway where First Colonial comes down. You cross Virginia Beach Boulevard, you go around the bend, and the tree is right there, right next to where the school bus parking lot is. The property was bought, it used to be private property, was bought by the city of Virginia Beach. There was a noise problem with Oceana, and the Base Realignment Commission, the BRAC Commission, decided that the city had to show good faith and buy up a lot of these peripheral properties around Oceana, or else the Department of Defense was just going to shut down Oceana and move the base elsewhere. And so the city scrambled and bought a bunch of these properties. So this tree is on city property now. It's a tier 1 tree. It's 87% the size of the state champion list trees. And the way that works, my tier 1, I keep talking about tier 1 trees, 75% to 99% the size of the state champion list are tier 1, 65% to 74% are tier 2, and then I have special category trees that have some historical or cultural or other interesting significance, biological significance. But this one was 87%, which is very large. That's anything up close to 90% of the state champion list is a very large tree. So I put my little plaque on it, and I had talked to the city arborist, who was Susan French at the time, And she was all excited about it, said, oh, yeah, it's a great program, blah, blah, blah. So she was very supportive. Well, she left and a new arborist came in named Brooke Costanza. She came from New York City and she didn't want signs on the trees. And I said, well, Susan said this was fine to do this. And she just kind of grumbled. And then that was the end of the conversation. But I noticed driving by here, the sign was missing. So I stopped by one day and put another sign up. I thought a local neighbor had probably taken it down or somebody wanted it for a souvenir or whatever. So, and then about a week later, that sign was missing too. So I put a third one up. And after that was missing, I called her up and I said, what's going on with these signs? And she said, oh, I told my people to take them all down on city property trees. And I said, why? I mean, they're not hurting the trees. They're, you know, I've measured the nail width. It's the size of the smallest woodpecker beak in North America, the downy woodpecker, and they make 100 or 200 open wound holes on trees all the time. It doesn't hurt them a bit. I make one closed wound tree that the tree heals around within a week, never leaks any sap or any drainage of any kind. And she just said, nope, not going to do it, not going to do it. And so I still haven't won that one. I think I'm going to take it to the city council. I'm kind of planning my attack here to get this so that I can put the signs back on, because lots of people have pointed out to me, hey, used to be a sign on this tree, now it's gone. What happened? And that's the problem. It's a problem with the city arborist. So, okay, next slide. So this tree is a swamp chestnut oak. Now, all of us probably have been down, what is it, London Bridge Road, and seen the Hunt Club Farm property there, which is a sort of a recreational farm now. They put the big pumpkin on top at Halloween, have big Christmas trees on top at Christmas, and they have petting zoos for children, and it's a really nice little place. But I did not have any idea in all the years of passing by that place that there was an old plantation back behind it that still owns the property, as a matter of fact. So the Jonathan Woodhouse plantation is located directly behind Hunt Club Farm. It's a little private road, but somebody nominated this tree, and I went down to measure it. I knocked on the door. The family that lives there, the Vogels, and very nice people. And I measured this tree, and sure enough, it was a tier 1. It's about 290 years old. No idea that place, I would never have seen that if somebody hadn't nominated it. As many times as I've driven by Hunt Club Farms. Right behind, out of the picture now, across this fence behind my daughter, was another tree that I had nominated and measured out, and it was going to be a state champion laurel oak. And I was so excited. It was my first state champion that I'd found, and I was really thrilled. Huge tree, but really tall tree and really big crown span, good sized trunk too. And so I nominated it. We're going through all the process, and I came back to measure it one day, and there was a 20-foot stump there with my sign still on it, but just a stump. It was cut off at about 20 foot of height. And I went to the Vogels and I said, what happened? They got struck by lightning. So they had to take it down, but they left the stump there. So there's a 20-foot stump there that was my first attempt at a state champion tree, and didn't end so well. But anyway, the stump is still there. It's a beautiful stump. Next slide, please. This is the king in Virginia Beach. Well, let's say it is the co-king. I'll show you another one in a minute. But this one is a cherry bark oak. It's down in Blackwater. At the time I took this picture, it was the oldest and largest living thing in Virginia Beach. To answer the question that somebody had put up here a minute ago, this one is between 475 and 500 years old. So it's a little older than the mini large live oak in Fairfield, but it's enormous. Now you can see how measuring the trunk is kind of interesting, because there's a slight rise to the ground. So, you know, if you measure it, if you stand back 10 feet and go up 48 inches from there, it's a whole different measurement than if you're standing up where my daughter is, because the land rises there. So, but it's actually about a 30-foot circumference tree. and you can see my daughter with her 2.5 foot arm sticking out. You can see how big that tree is, like 8 feet, or more, maybe 10 feet in diameter. It's in a horse pasture out behind a little bitty house. I was sitting up at the Brock Center doing my oyster work one day, and the lady sent me an email and nominated this tree. She was the property owner, and very nice lady. And I called her and I said, well, I don't have too much to do today. Maybe I'll drive down and take a look. Well, from the Brock Center down to this tree in Blackwater, 45-minute drive. You're still in Virginia Beach. And as I got down there, I looked around, and as you look in the background, smallish trees, not big trees at all. And I thought, well, she probably just wants it to be a notable tree. That's nice, and I'll go take a look at it. I came around the bend, saw this tree, and it was like the clouds parted, the angels were singing, and I just sat there and stared at it for 10 minutes. It was just unbelievable. I got out and we walked out to do the measurements on it. All old auto parts around the base of it. There's an old rusted bumper sticking up out of the root, the root flare there. There's a rear view mirror that you can still see there. They used to just throw their old junk parts off their cars around the base of it. And I thought, well, how rude is that? And then I started thinking, well, it's in a horse pasture. It's got all that iron from the rusting parts. Maybe the combination of the nitrogen from the manure and the rusting parts, it just created this enormous tree. Third largest in the United States. It's on the state champion list. It's not the state champion because it's not as tall. You have field trees, you have forest trees. The field trees get much wider and rounder, but not as tall. The forest trees are competing for sunlight, so they don't grow a large canopy, but they just get very tall. So this one is not as tall, so that's why it's not the state champion, but it is by far the largest trunk of a cherry bark oak in Virginia. Okay, next slide. So I wanted to show this. I just found this a couple weeks ago. Back in the mid 1800s, there was the gold rush in California, hence the name San Francisco 49ers for the football team out there. That was in 1849 was when gold was discovered at Sutter's Mill near San Francisco. Well, the word came back to the East Coast that, hey, there's gold out here everywhere, just tons of gold. So all these wealthy plantation owners in the East Coast sent representatives out there. They called them factors. They sent their factor out there to go prospect for gold, or else buy leases that they could then sell, or something they could do with the gold rush. And about 99% of them came back empty-handed after spending a lot of money of the rich people on the East Coast, and said, well, we didn't find anything, nothing. But what they did bring back were some redwoods. And they brought the redwoods back from California, Northern California, and said, well, I didn't find any gold, but I brought you a tree. And so some of these trees were then planted about 175 years ago. And there are two that are over 100 feet tall now in Virginia Beach. One of them is at the Burning Tree Farm, which is now a kennel at the corner of Holland Road and Nimmo Parkway. You can see it's sticking up above the rest of the trees. It's the tallest tree. There's 5 notable trees on that property, but it's the tallest. And then there's another one by the Green Hill by the Bay plantation off of Great Neck that just doesn't look like it ought to be there, but there it is. And they're both over 100 feet tall. Now I started thinking, boy, those are really some of the tallest trees in Virginia Beach. And then I found this slide, and I thought it was very interesting. If you look at that little sprig on the left, that's a 100-foot tall tree. So that's the tallest trees of these redwoods in Virginia Beach. And look at these other trees. You have the summit fir, the Hyperion, which is the largest living tree right now, and that's a Sequoia sempervirens, the coastal redwood. And then the Nooksack giant actually was measured after it was cut down. So yeah, hopefully, it was a long time ago, many years ago, hundreds of years ago. So we're not really sure how tall it was, but they measured it at 465. It's a Douglas fir, 465 feet tall. But if you compare what I think of as huge trees on that little left side that's 100 feet tall, and you look at these monsters that are growing out in California and Oregon and those areas, it gives you a sense of perspective. So come back. These trees are all over 1,000 years old. Come back in another 1,000 years, and these ones in Virginia Beach they're doing very well, and they seem to love the climate. So we'll come back in our next life and see how tall they get. But anyway, I thought that was an interesting comparison to what we have and then what is around. And the Hyperion is the tallest tree in the world, not just in the United States. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Now, this is an interesting tree. You look at it and you look at the other trees around it, and it really stands out. But it's a great example of a tree that for some reason was spared when the clear cutters came through. No telling why. Why didn't they take this one down as well? This is all second and third growth around the tree. And these are decent sized trees. They're not huge, but they're decent. But this tree now has just been certified as the national champion black oak. It's down behind the doggy spa at the corner of London Bridge Road and Dam Neck Road. There's a little blue building on the right that's a little doggy spa, and it's in the woods back behind. It's a city property, so I couldn't put a sign on it. But go to the next slide if you would, please. When you get a little closer to it, you can see it's pretty enormous, and the root flare and all is just is very impressive. And this is the fourth tree that I have found in Virginia Beach that was big enough. They're all black oaks, and it was big enough to be a national champion. And the three other ones that I found, one came down in a hurricane, and one came down from an ice storm, and one came down from a series of thunderstorms. And one was behind the Oceana Commissary, and back there, just in a little woodsy area. And I was all set to, I was in the process of nominating that for a national champion. And then I got a call from one of the homeowners nearby there. It said, well, she's down, and it could come down in a thunderstorm. So, but I'm hoping this one will stand. It's very difficult to find. Let's go to the next slide. I think there's one more of it. Yeah, you can see it's almost 28 feet in circumference. So that's a big tree for a black oak. Well, obviously, since it's a national champion, it's about the biggest there is. There's one in Connecticut that we beat by a few points. It gets very competitive on these gigantic trees. There was a laurel oak in Kansas, of all places, that was the national champion, and they put signs out, as you drove into this little town, home of the national champion, laurel oak, blah, blah, blah. Well, Byron Carmian, those tree hunters I told you about, they found one bigger in Virginia, and so they put that up as a national champion. Well, these folks from Kansas were so incensed by the fact that we had beaten them that they flew a group of 6 people out to go measure the tree to make sure we weren't fudging it on this end. And sure enough, we weren't. And they had to change their sign to home of the second largest tree in laurel oak in the United States. So, but it gets very competitive on these things. So the people up in Connecticut are not happy with us that we found this tree. Interestingly, it was found with entirely new technology. Byron Carmian, Gary Williamson, me, lots of other tree hunters just go out and tromp around the woods. We get trees nominated. Somebody sees a big tree, whatever. This one was found by a 27-year-old tech geek who's a really nice kid named Dylan Kania, using a system called Eagle View, which uses drones and aircraft and flies over different areas, and he just picks out the biggest trees. He has found 5 Tier 1 notable trees for me using this system, and he found this one. So I would never in a million years, it's hard to find. It's back in the woods, and there's no path or anything right by it. It took me 4 visits to those woods to be able to figure out which one it was. There are 2 other notable trees there, But I said, these trees are not big enough to be national champions. And he thought this one was, and sure enough, it is. So it's just been declared the national champion and the state champion. And you can see the size of the trunk there. So, okay, next slide. Okay, our last slide here. This is a tree down in Kempsville, right off of Providence Road. The owner has named it the family tree, and it kind of looks like one of those charts where you put your great grandparents and your grandparents and your cousins and everybody and aunts and uncles, and they call it the family tree. It's very interesting for a couple of reasons, though. I was standing over on the right side looking at it, and the owner of the property was over on the left side. And I said, "This is an absolutely gorgeous northern red oak." And he said, "Well, I hate to correct you, but it's a southern red oak." And I said, "No, sir, it's clearly northern, and the leaves are very distinctly different." He said, "Come over here." And so I walked over to his side, and it was very clearly a southern red oak on that side. So this is another one like the one I mentioned before that had cross-pollinated at some point and was showing characteristics of both northern and southern red oak. Now it's right on the back property line of this property, as you can see, and there's a fence. The fence, the tree actually straddles the property line, and behind it is a park, a Kempsville Park, that's city property. The owner petitioned the city to change the property line to move it 10 feet out and across and then back in, so this tree wouldn't be straddling and they could build the fence around it to protect the tree, and the city council agreed to that. So it's the only one that I know of that the city actually donated the property to the homeowner to be able to protect the tree. Okay, well, that in a nutshell is the Notable Tree Program, and I'd be happy to answer any questions or any thoughts you might have. Love to hear them.
Brent, that was marvelous. I love your stories. I like your daughter getting involved and all this. I just love all of it. And it
Well,
really
every tree
brings
has a story.
home. Pardon?
Every tree has a story. They all have
It
life
does,
stories.
doesn't it?
Yeah, they really
And
do.
it is heartbreaking when these trees come down for whatever reason.
Yeah,
It is
it is.
just heartbreaking. Okay, everybody, if you would like to ask Brent a question, please put it into the chat box and I will read it out to him. And so far, the main question that has come through was the oldest notable tree, and you
Right.
did mention that.
Yes, I saw the one here, one of the address of the national champion. It's at the intersection of Dam Neck Road and London Bridge Road, right behind the doggy spa there. If you walk back into the woods, you're probably going to have a difficult time finding it. I'm going to try to take a special tour there as part of the Winter Wildlife Festival. I do 3 tree tours every year, a northern, central Virginia Beach, and a southern Virginia Beach tour. And I'm going to try to include this one because it is a national champion and it's worth looking at. There's a lot of poison ivy back in there. It's not easy to find. So if you're just casually wanting to look at it, it's probably not the best to look at. I'll have the address and so forth on the tree map pretty soon, as soon as I get to it. But that's where it is, though, that intersection of London Bridge and Dam Neck, back in those woods.
And just a reminder, you said the tree map is on the Lynnhaven River Now site.
It is. You can also just Google Virginia Beach notable trees, and it'll take you right to it.
Oh, okay. Okay,
probably
that's
the
good.
easiest.
Let's see. Okay, can you share the address of the national champion?
Yeah, that's the one I was
Oak
just
again,
talking
and
about.
was that the one you just
Yes,
shared?
ma'am. And then this one I just saw was about non-native trees. Interestingly, the Virginia Big Tree Program and the National Big Tree Program do not discriminate against native and non-native. So there are, like crepe myrtles, for example, are not native trees. The largest crepe myrtle, the state champion, is in the parking lot at Steinhilber's restaurant in Thalia. So, if you're parking your car in the front of Steinhilber's to have dinner one night, walk around to the left side over by where the kitchen and the dumpster and all that side, and you'll see one of my little signs on the tree. It's not enormous, but for a crepe myrtle it is. And that's, yeah, so the native and non-native are not differentiated in these programs.
Have you noted any non-native trees besides the redwoods?
Yeah, and that's, yeah, there's many. There's numerous. Some are invasive. I don't, if I find a tree that's an invasive tree, like a tree of heaven or a Bradford pear or something like that, I don't include those in my program. That's just my, it's good to be the king when you have your own program. You can make up your own rules. So I don't put any invasives, but I do include non-natives like crepe myrtles is a good example. I mean, we say they're non-natives, but there's probably more crepe myrtles practically than any other tree in Virginia Beach. There's so many. So, but yeah, the non-natives do get counted.
Okay, this question, can the notable tree program you operate be cloned to operate on the Middle Peninsula? I'm a master naturalist with the Middle Peninsula Master Naturalist.
Yeah, absolutely. Matter of fact, my program was there's a magazine called Coastal Virginia, or no, Coastal Virginia, and this was I won the award for the best new environmental program a few years ago in the Coastal Virginia Best of Virginia Awards. And after that, I got calls from Arlington, I got calls from Richmond, I got calls from Petersburg, I got calls from Vancouver, British Columbia. The power of the internet, people found this program. So I've helped other people set up their programs, and I'm happy to do so. I have the program copyrighted for my own purposes in Virginia Beach, but I've had many, many requests to go look at trees in everywhere. I've had people come from Richmond for the tours, people come from Fredericksburg for the tours, and I just can't, I don't have the time or the ability to get up there and actually look at their trees, unfortunately. I see some of them in passing, but they'll say, hey, I got a big tree behind my house. Oh, where do you live? Well, I live outside of Charlottesville. Oh, geez. So, that's a little far. So I help the people in Chesapeake. There's a master naturalist out there who's trying to set something like this up. So it takes some time and it takes some dedication, but it's well worth it. Well worth it. So I'd be happy to help you in any way.
Okay, somebody asked about contact info, and I
Yeah.
posted it. It's probably the first chat, and it's Brent at lrnow.org.
That's correct. Brent at lrnow.org.
Okay, it is in the chat feature.
Now, if you have a tree that you want to nominate, if you go to the Virginia Beach Notable Tree site, there is actually a drop-down menu in there. You read through the different pages, and there's a nomination form. And that that form goes to our administrative assistant at Lynn Haven River Now, and then he relays that info to me so I can go measure the tree. So if you just want to talk about trees, I'm fine to do that. But if you have one particularly that you want to nominate, then you use that form. That's a great way for me to keep track of them all.
There is a tree that a friend of mine, we walked out to see it from across brackish water. So we really couldn't get to it, and it's on city property. And it's near a Great Neck area and all this. It's near Hilltop, actually. And it was like, really? Yeah. And he said it's a bald cypress. And of course, my camera didn't get but just such a good picture. But I mentioned it to the city arborist at the time, and she said no. She says, I've been all over, there's not one back there. But I swear, I think this gentleman is right. He grew up in that area, and he still lives in that area, and he's not a young man anymore.
Well,
so I think he's right.
Well,
But
it's entirely possible. I've had trees that the city has claimed didn't exist, and In fact, I've measured them and labeled them and certified them. So if he thinks he has a potentially notable tree, and bald cypress get enormous. You know, there was one that was 30 feet, 32 feet in circumference called Big Mama down in the Suffolk swamps, and it came down in a hurricane. But we have a very famous picture of 12 master naturalists inside the trunk. It was hollow, and 12 master naturalists in there all at once getting their picture taken. So it was that big. So yeah, please, by all means, if you think he has one, have him nominate it, and I'll go take a look at it. And if I have to take a boat, I'll take a boat. No problem.
Well, I was fortunate enough to get to see Big Mama before she came down.
Oh,
And it was one of Byron Carmine's last tours out there.
that's
We were
great.
able to go when the water was down, so you didn't have to canoe out to it.
Yeah, that's a good time.
Awesome, awesome. The knees were taller than me.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I'm a massively tall person at 5'2". And they were, anyway, let's see if there's anything else. Okay, it's been, I think everybody is real appreciative of what you have told us tonight. I have heard your talk before, and I swear it's all like brand new stuff each time. I do
Well,
want to mention that this is being recorded, and it will be brought up on our website, vbmg.org, in the next few weeks.
okay,
So
great.
for anyone who wants to see it again, please take a look at our website. And also there you could see the talk coming up in November and our 2026 lineup. So last chance, everybody. Last chance. Okay,
Is
thank
Linda
you.
Gunther here?
Oh, one lady did make the comment that she has heard that lady in Fairfield, her daughter now lives in that Fairfield Live Oak house, and she loves it too.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yay.
I've talked to her only once, but she was very supportive and seemed to love the tree. So excellent.
Oh,
I'm here, Brett.
Oh, hey, Linda. I just wanted to
Hey.
say hi from Chris.
Yeah, I was gonna text her in a minute. Thanks.
Okay, all right.
okay. Nothing else has come up, and thank you for taking your time to tell us about this.
No, my
And
pleasure.
I'm glad to hear that this program is growing.
It's
Pardon the
growing.
pun.
Literally, it's growing, but yeah, it's getting bigger, and we'll be up to. I expect in the next few years we'll be up to over 300 trees, tier 1 trees. I've hardly ever. I've only got like 50 tier 2s because I just don't have the time to get to them all. But I thought once upon a time I'd probably find 50 or 75 trees. So I'm well into the 200s and on my way to 300. So.
And who would have thought that for suburban Virginia Beach?
Yeah, I know
Yeah.
it. I know it about that. Okay, well, my pleasure. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope everybody got something out of it.
Okay, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
And Mariella, I guess we can leave the meeting. Good night.